Welcome back everyone to CTV. We're going to continue our conversation now with Sufi author and teacher Sheikh Kabir Helminski and continue to deepen that journey with his book In the House of Remembering, the living tradition of Sufi teaching. Now, for those unfamiliar with the book, it really puts us into the heart of living in a Sufi community, bringing 31 spiritual conversations with companions, bringing a whole mix of Sufi stories, Rumi poetry, illuminating personal experiences and scriptural reminders. Thank you so much again, Dede or Sheikh Kabir Helminski, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Let's begin with very intense time that we continue to be in, and these reminders, which I'll share a couple of quotes in a minute of, that it is possible through whatever we're experiencing to taste and be with heaven on earth. Can you explain a little bit more about that? Also in the context of this balancing of this whole outer experience and what's happening within.
I suppose it's always been so. And I mean, isn't it true that the divine would never abandon us? That intelligence and love that created us always offers a path of return, always offers to us its own presence where we find that we have the strength we need to meet grief and sorrow. Courage is offered to us, love is offered to us from within our own being, from within this heart that every human being carries. If only we can sort of clear away the rubbish and begin to polish it like a mirror, and then the divine truth, the divine intelligence will reflect in your own heart.
Inshallah, God willing, may it be so. And I would love to just share with our friends the quotes that kind of stimulate this question, if you like. You've said that as human beings, we may similarly fear emerging into the expansive world that is beyond the boundaries of this egoistic existence. And the goal really being to be living in two worlds at once, which brings the whole name of threshold society, that kind of standing in the two, or standing in a spirit within the mind body. And then again, this inner openness that you share that allows us to live our lives while really paying attention and having an openness in that inner direction, and this guidance of this place of quiet, I guess, that's residing deep within us all. But Dede, I'd love to also bring us to the next set of quotes, which is, how possible is this to do alone? I mean, in the book you've shared that it's more proper to remember the divine and worship together than to do so alone. And I'd love you to elaborate on that more for us, and perhaps in tandem with these lines from Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi about men being minds, and this notion that we're all completely different. And I love what's shared at the end. What is wanted is a heart full of love and pain and sighs.
Yes. Recently, many of us have been more alone than usual. And I had an experience just a few days ago. I think it was starting to get to me, the little bit of depression for no particular reason. And then I had some unexpected guests. And I spent a couple of hours on the back porch outside, just receiving these beautiful people who had driven, well, actually 12 hours to visit. A really beautiful couple. So Camille and I sat with them. We had a beautiful conversation about our mutual interests. And afterwards, they left. I felt our hearts were so uplifted, and the things that were getting me down before seemed to have just been washed away as if they really had no real existence. So that's just evidence of the fact that we, what we mean for each other, and when our mirrors begin to reflect each other, and the qualities of other human beings who have these virtues and this goodwill, they reflect on us and we respond. This is a beauty of life and human life, and may we never lose sight of that. May we never become so digital that we lose this tangible heart-to-heart connection. Of course, we're having it now across a great ocean, and we're grateful for that. But we also need this experience in the tangible world. So this is just at the level of ordinary human life. But I can also say that in my own experience, the great experience of divine grace and love sometimes comes to us powerfully through ceremonies, through worship, collective worship, through the meeting of hearts in what we call sohbet, or which is spiritual conversation with a purpose. And it's as if these collective experiences, I would say, mediate the divine grace and presence in a way that is rare alone and different from being alone. So when I look back on the experiences that have helped a trust in the spiritual nature of reality, to help that trust grow, it was very often experiences that came being with people in worship, in a group zikr, in just the sweet meetings of the lovers of God. So Sufism was never meant to be for hermits, for solitaries, and it can't be conveyed through a tutorial alone. Tutorials, one-to-one relationships have their place, but Sufism implies a network of relationships, a spiritual family, a community of people who are committed to similar values, committed to a common aspiration. And this helps us all. Your qualities may inspire me, someone who has generosity that I don't have teaches me generosity. Someone who has a humility that I don't have kindles maybe a little bit of humility in me. So this is the setup, because the individual human being is not the ultimate unit of reality. We are not entirely separate, even though we are individualized. We are of one soul. We are of one infinite life source. And this is the setup within this existence. Obviously, God, Allah, loves individuality. Otherwise, we would not have billions of individuals and individual stories. But how those stories intersect and influence one another, especially when we come under the influence of divine grace and guidance, then we begin to operate, you might say, under a different set of laws, spiritual laws, I mean, that synchronicities increase. The miraculous becomes more a part of everyday life. And through that, gratitude develops, and awe, and finally trust that we live in a spiritual reality, and that there is an infinite spiritual intelligence that is always communicating with us and guiding us on a path of return. So I started out talking about, why we need each other, why to try to do this alone. I mean, why would you? Why would anybody try to do something entirely alone? Musicians love to play with other musicians. Athletes, soccer players don't just run around a field kicking a ball all by themselves. It's this set of network of relationships that is human life and spiritual life. But especially on the spiritual journey, where we're so likely to become distracted or discouraged or heedless, forgetful of our aspiration, to have a container for our spiritual intention, to have a set of friends who will remind us and inspire us, and who will also be our fellow pupils in the school of love, where we're learning to love despite ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, having attended for many years now the sort of Sufi community, the quality of zikr alone, when you do it yourself and when you do it with your fellow dervishes or collective beings, is just completely different. And yeah, I get it. I mean, I don't quite understand why you wouldn't, if you've got a problem with your heart, you see a heart surgeon, or if you've got a problem with your teeth, you go to a dentist. But most of us are troubled with our soul. And I don't know, sometimes I've been reflecting quite a lot over the last 2 years on sort of the Alcohol Anonymous program. And in a way, maybe we're all, addicts of the self, particularly in today's culture. And, you can't sort of, on the AA program, which is obviously deeply spiritual, God is very much at the center of that program. You meet with your AA buddies and you go to your weekly meetings. And so this is no different, to be accountable out of the self, call it nafsaholic if you like.
Yes.
Turn up to the NA meetings.
Yes. And yet, we are alone. And there is a practice to be done alone every day. And there's a deepening that comes from knowing yourself through your own being. So we're never suggesting that spirituality is completely practiced in a collective. No, we have much of our time when we are alone, and sometimes too, we take a solitary retreat and we experience something we can only experience in that solitary fashion. So it's not either or, it's definitely both and. And in the end, we all come back to our own conscience. And we cultivate that conscience and we trust that conscience, even at times when it may go against the collective.
Mm.
When it may, by that I mean the majority is not always right. The majority does not have a monopoly on truth, often quite the opposite. So we also come back to the profound importance of being an individual and knowing the truth for oneself in one's own experience. Uh, we don't go to, we don't participate in a Sufi community merely to bring consolation to ourselves or merely for social satisfactions. No, we're in that community to observe ourselves, observe our reactions, even our resistance and judgment, our negativity, which is also part of the process. We wouldn't want to mislead people into thinking, should you find a Sufi community you can trust and appreciate, um, that it will all just be, an experience of beauty and unbroken affection. No, there's work, there's struggle with relationships, struggle with the challenges of the teaching, and sometimes the teacher may reflect back to us aspects of ourselves we don't really want to see. So this is also part of it. It's work. It's a project.
Yeah, and it just, when you were sharing, it just took me back to something that came up in our last conversation, which was this kind of meeting the Abraham within you. Like at some point, we all have to find that relationship with the divine for ourselves, no matter what the cost, no matter what we have to turn against, be it our own tribe or family members or like loved ones. And it was interesting that you talked about this. We are sort of, we come alone, like our soul comes alone and it goes back alone. So even, I think this was something that I've been waking up to again in the last few years. Like, actually, there's no sort of free pass or bypass, or no one else can do the work for me. Like my soul's work is my soul's work, and only through divine grace can what needs to come and be opened. But there's a beautiful passage. Sorry, you were going to say something.
No, go ahead.
No, there's a beautiful passage about bees that hopefully we can come back to later, that beautifully kind of pulls together the importance of that community in making honey together.
Yes. Yeah, what I was going to say a moment ago, and I paused, is I was remembering that this vast spiritual intelligence and love is truly on our side. It's working to educate us and to lead us to an experience of the true dimensions of divine love and generosity and intelligence. And that's what life is about.
Yeah, no, I mean,
everyone, by the way, for everyone. No one escapes. There may be byways and highways and cul-de-sacs, but in the end, every human soul is on this journey.
beautiful. No, absolutely. I also love this particular quote, or these two, one from, again, Mathnavi, because there's so much, again, it's come up since we spoke on, pop psychology, and so much around just change your mind, or, it's almost like an ego driven, if you just change your set of beliefs, you're there type culture. And I just loved how it's kind of calling upon something bigger than your own agency. And the way that Rumi says it's so beautiful, this, a shaker of the milk in the churn. That was the line that really stood out, and tasting butter in the milk. And I'd love you to just elaborate a bit more on this. Why do we need God, the divine, for true soul transformation?
Well, yeah, what a beautiful metaphor for our true situation. That each of us has a secret at the core of our being. Here, it's the butter hidden in the milk. But it's also spoken about in terms of a word in Arabic and other languages, sir, secret, which I sometimes prefer to translate as the mysterian within the human being, the intrinsic meaning within every human being. And so Rumi says it this way. And by the way, this is the theme of a book that I've recently completed, and the title is The Mysterian. So Rumi says, imagine a great city full of palaces and monumental buildings and luxuries and delicious foods and gardens and everything, every beauty that a human being would seek. But this city is missing only one thing. It's missing a true human being. Then he says, that great city is the human being. That is our situation. And that true human being within this incredible city is the mysterian. It's this secret. It is your essence. And you could do many things in life, have many accomplishments, accumulate wealth and possessions and degrees and accolades. But if you neglect this mysterian, which is the essential reality, the intrinsic meaning of the human being, if that is neglected, the rest of it is just a waste. So, this mysterian is infinitely close. It is present just behind the veil of the thinking mind, the conceptual mind, the kind of random habitual thoughts that pass through our awareness, and behind the veil of our desires, our likes and dislikes, and our conflicting desires, and behind our sense impressions, as we move back in consciousness to the very source of our awareness. Yes, it takes some training, it takes a teaching, it takes practice, but it's not so difficult. It's not impossible. It's not like you're betting on a one in a million chance for enlightenment. No, that's not the game here. It is the intrinsic meaning of every human being. It is your essential witness. And yes, it happens to be covered over, and some of us are very far from from experiencing it, but it really is infinitely close to us, and it is our very nature, our intrinsic meaning, our essence. So there are spiritual teachings and moral teachings and great poetry, such as we have in Rumi, all of the incredible metaphors, analogies, stories, fables, even sometimes vulgar jokes. All of these are helping us to see within the panorama of human life that there is an intelligence operating, a love that is drawing us, and that there is at the very heart of our experience a experience of intimacy with the divine through which we see, we experience, we know that our consciousness is sourced in the divine, that our, what we call our virtues, our qualities, our strengths are sourced in the divine. Our love, generosity, capacity for forgiveness, compassion, patience, things like this are accessible through a portal within our own essence. And the spiritual process is one of awakening a continual presence, a sustained presence that is a direct expression of that divine intelligence and love. Yes, it's individualized. Each of us has a different capacity, a different quality of expressing those divine qualities. But nevertheless, when we remove what's extraneous, when we remove what has just been merely conditioned by our habits and by our all of the social conditioning, brainwashing, including fears, when we can polish those things away, then we come to our natural state. And in that natural state, courage is available, patience is available, a kind of discerning awareness is available, and even a kind of knowledge about what is the next step that I must take. Do I go right? Do I go left? Or do I go straight? And a trust in our inner knowing. And even if that next step leads to sorrow or grief or loss, we know that even in that, there is something intended for us. There is some gift in that for us, along with possibly the grief, or sorrow, or pain. So we begin to live in a world in which nothing is wasted, not even our mistakes, not even our wrong decisions. They can be the cause of our returning to what we call the straight path, the most direct path of return to truth, to what is most real, to the divine.
When they say, and I've often wondered about this actually, so I just wanted to check today, when people, often I've seen when people pass away, there's a sort of saying, may God protect his or her secret. Is that referring to what you've just described there?
We say, may God bless their secret. Yes. Yes, may God bless their secret. So, of course, God blesses their secret. God gave this secret, and the secret is of God. And we are from God, and to God we return. So through that secret, we are blessed.
I'd like to come back to that actually, because it kind of follows on from what you've just said, when perhaps you've just explained it already actually, when Hazrat Ali said, God acquainted me with himself through himself.
Yes.
And
Yes, who can possibly explain that except maybe Hazrat Ali himself? But let me try to say something. I think this is an example of a very high level of truth, which people in some other traditions might call the non-dual nature of reality. And our understanding at the highest level through the great friends of God, namely the awliya or the saints, and through Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his beautiful companions like Hazrati Ali, we find them saying things where uh, they, in a sense, they're not logical. They surprise us. For example, a man, and I know this is one that you appreciate, someone came up to Hazrati Ali, who, for those who don't know, was a young man compared to Muhammad, the first person to uh, have faith in the Prophet's prophetic mission, and a very close, brilliant, courageous, articulate human being. Well, somebody comes running up to Ali and says to him, Ya Ali, tell us, when will the resurrection be? Resurrection being, yes, that time when all of humanity will be resurrected in the form of either their good deeds, their virtues, or on the other hand, their misdeeds, etc. And Ali answers him by saying, you ask about the resurrection from the resurrection, meaning you're asking, you want to know about what is the resurrection, but you're asking one who is already resurrected. So Ali was saying, implying that he had experienced the reality of another hadith, which is, die before you die. And Mevlana Rumi says it another way, die in love if you wish to be truly alive. So Ali, at that stage, was living through his body of resurrection, through his spiritual body. In other words, he was pure spirit embodied. And when you look at the incredible beauty and clarity and depth of so many of his sayings, you feel that there's some profound intelligence coming through him. And this is an example of that. So we don't want to turn this into a mystique and wonder, am I resurrected? Who's resurrected? Is my sheikh resurrected? Things like that. We need to be humble about this, very modest about things like this. But it is possible for each of us to have moments when we are not full of the false self, when we're not living from our vanity or jealousy or resentment, when we are just living from that mysterian within us. And we are living in the world like honest and objective witnesses, the eyes of God in the world. And we're here to serve. And we're here to reflect God's qualities within our own environment and relationships. And to do that, we simply need to reduce our envy, our resentment, our pride, our vanity, our violence, our misplaced desires, and come to be what we are designed to be and have a fully human life.
That just beautifully, again, brings us to this sort of notion how this is all like a moment-to-moment experiential existence. And when I first heard this many years ago, that Sufi is the child of the moment, I never really fully understood it. And then just revisiting it through the book, you've said that in the Academy of Realization, pay attention to the adept of love. Pay attention to what? To one who is a master of love, to one who is matured in love. Why? So that one day, O son, you may become a father. The child may become a parent. Sufis are sometimes called Ibn al-Waqt, the child of the moment. To live in the present moment. To be able to live in the present. To be able to be spontaneous, relatively unconditioned. That, again, that concept of awareness. Not to be held back in self-consciousness or fear. And I guess it's just like, I guess every moment, as you were just sharing about resurrection with respect to Hazrat Ali, I guess at some point when you're very deep in relationship with the mysterian, I guess every moment has that childlike curiosity of, oh, and and this too, and it's that balance of being able to, in that moment, through that awareness, hold the inner, or witness the outer, witness the inner.
Yes. Witnessing our inner life, our relatively purified inner life, namely the experience of our soul while we're fully engaged in life, is a more complete and more human way of being than being completely absorbed in outer life and merely reacting to it and trying to grab something from outer life. No, when one's inner soul is awakened, then there is a possibility of conscious choice and not mere reaction. So, at the same time, to be the child of the moment, to be spontaneous, to delight in the moment, is one state of being, a very beautiful state of being. Reminds us of the words of Jesus. Not until you become a child will you know the kingdom of heaven. But there's also a complementary truth to this, which is that the mature human being, the mature Sufi, the mature spiritual seeker, is also the parent of the moment, the father or mother of the moment, which means that in addition to having that spontaneity and delight, there's also a much greater awareness that sees the end in the beginning, can have a vision of the future and the outcome, can have an intention that encompasses a greater span of time, where such a person takes responsibility outside of time with a consciousness, awareness that's outside of time, for everything that's happening within the world of time. And one example of this, a very practical example of this, is in the Native American traditions, where the wise of the tribe, when they made decisions, they would do their best to keep in mind the outcome 7 generations hence. What I'm choosing today, how will that affect my children's children, 7 generations ahead? That's the parent of the moment. But first, to be a child of the moment is necessary.
That's so beautiful, and yeah, there's a lot there, a lot. I just wanted to quickly also return to something you had shared about, the Sufi path isn't like a free pass, and yeah, it's actually really tough. It's really tough, um, but it's also incredibly beautiful. But I loved this, this man coming to the Prophet, peace be upon him, saying, ever since I got involved with you in this way, my life has been really difficult. It's almost what I want to say to you today. I face incredible challenges internally and externally. And I didn't really understand it. And I was hoping you could shed light. When the Prophet responded, do you think that this theme will let go of you until it's brought you to your destination? And I paired this with the inner ablution, because I guess within this, sometimes I think one of the things this one's found quite difficult is the more sort of oppressed type form of religion, and then this huge like guilt complex, shame complexes that often you can get quite caught in, that are just another side of the nafs or the ego playing themselves out and keeping you away from spirit. And I remember being really, really deeply touched, as many of us were, when we first came across this inner ablution, which seemed to offer this kind of doorway to just aligning a little bit more with the natural cosmic ordering of things. But I'd love you to share a bit more light on, do you think this theme will let go of you until it's brought you to your destination?
Yes. Well, starting with the inner ablution, many people experience religion as it's been presented to them, which is often presented as the religion of fear more than the religion of love. Their associations with religion is one of being shamed, being made to feel guilty, being made to feel unworthy. And people may react with anger and a stubborn rejection of religion because they don't want to be made to feel that way. And sometimes, too, they may actually feel that the preachers of that sort of religion are asking them to be less aware than they already are, if you know what I mean. So that leads to the rejection of what I would call false religion. But here with the inner ablution, we remind ourselves that we are imperfect, but that our faults, this is not to excuse them or justify them, but that our faults are often what lead us back to help us to recognize our need for divine love and divine healing, and that we will find that from or within the nature of spiritual reality itself, even if it comes through another human being. it is still that same divine grace and love coming through them. So that restores us to our, convinced of the sincerity of my repentance. I feel cleansed, purified, and freed of any pain, resentment, or guilt, and gratefully assume my rightful place in God's presence. Now, switching over to this other beautiful, remarkable response from the Prophet Muhammad. How can we explain this? It's this deen, this religion, but the word deen means more than religion in its outer sense. The deen means more like the truth of the way things are. It could even be translated as the Tao. And if it were translated into Sanskrit, I would use the word dharma, which means, you might say, the law of the universe. But that law of the universe, that dharma, that Tao, that deen, is returning us to the real, returning us to the divine reality. And yet, we sometimes go kicking and screaming instead of taking the easy path. We still are full of resistance and hemming and hawing and bargaining and so forth with the truth, bargaining with reality, bargaining with God. And yet, the divine is relentless. It's out of love, not out of meanness. Out of love, it's going to keep us moving even when we don't want to go forward. It pushes us or it draws us. And we're under that grace. We're under that unrelenting grace. Once we have, and I mean this especially when we have committed to a path, once we truly commit, and not everybody commits. For instance, I heard a musician speaking recently. He said, the difference between somebody who becomes a really good musician and somebody who just sort of dawdles with an instrument is that the one who really becomes a good musician is committed to playing every day, picks up their instrument every day, no matter what. And some people just pick it up every now and then, and they never progress very far. They play the same old song, then they put their instrument down, they come back a few weeks later, they play the same old song, and they never learn a new song, they never master the instrument. So commitment, commitment, commitment. And once we commit, the universe rises up to support us, even through those difficult passages when we're just about ready to, turn back or run and hide. And the Deen, the Dharma, says, no, you're not getting out of this. Forward, keep moving forward. Come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving, come, even though you have broken your vows 1,000 times, come and come yet again. Ours is not a caravan of despair.
I really needed to hear that today. Thank you. It is like learning to play tennis, but I think it's, I'm just going to share this slide because I think maybe many can resonate with this, Dede, because, the religion of Islam that we grew up with, we were told to worship, we were told to pray, we were told about remembrance and giving those in need. None of this was kind of new, groundbreaking, if you like, in terms of the practices and the techniques to reach enlightenment or, be more spiritual. And yet it's taken a while to realize, like, the playing tennis isn't necessarily about perfecting all of these things and having, a spreadsheet where you get to tick off that I performed it. I think it was actually through this tradition that, it just got blown away. Things just started to sort of get turned on their head in a way, because if we're lacking the awareness or the intention and really with each act of worship, and of course, love as the overall context, which I'd love to return to. But, it's these lines of Mevlana in the book that just really blew something away for me, which was, that moment of prostration, that one point where the forehead touches the earth. And so it just kind of made me pause and reflect, well, how many prostrations has that, really landed for this one? So yeah, I would love you to just share for our viewers some more on, religiosity versus using these techniques and tools for your own emancipation.
Yes. I think what you're referring to, Tazeen, is the danger of us making religion an idol, making the rituals, the outer forms, an idol, and losing sight of the purpose of worship, the purpose of fasting, the purpose of pilgrimage, etc. That all of this is presented to us as a very elegant and comprehensive spiritual training system. But it's so important that we understand the purpose and understand about, I would say, the nature of consciousness, the nature of the self. We need a certain meta teaching, it seems, to grasp each of these practices in their proper perspective. And it's not as if the Prophet, peace be upon him, and other of the saints didn't speak it clearly. They did, but often we couldn't really hear the meaning of their words. There's a hadith that says, if it were not for the dispersion of your hearts and your excessive speaking, you would hear what I hear. If it were not for the dispersion of your heart and your excessive speaking, meaning the activity of your busy mind, your inner talking, and all of that, except for those things, you would hear what I hear. And what did he hear? He heard the divine revelation. He heard through Gabriel, a message about the nature of reality. And he also says another hadith. He said, if it was not for the shaitans hovering around the hearts of human beings, they would be able to see the divine kingdom. Now, shaitans are those, shall we say, negative thought forms, any negative thought which, in a sense, acquire a reality, a substantiality of their own if we think them often enough. And we're not talking here about the devil. We're talking about the little shaitans that plague us, and which we have helped to create. And we when we give them our attention, we give them our life force, our energy. And so he's saying, if it were not for all of this hovering around you, you would be able to see the malakut, that is the divine kingdom, the eternal state of things, the realm of the divine names. You would be living in that other reality, would be part of this reality. two worlds would become one world. And that should be our true state, where we feel the interpenetration of the realm of the divine attributes, the divine names, penetrating and manifesting in this material existence, because we're not exclusively invested only in the material existence, but we see the material existence as a theater of divine manifestation. We see all of this is happening within God. All of this is the action of God. And when we know that, well, then we know that.
So beautiful. Again, the reminder about these thoughts. Mevlana saying, if your thought is a rose, then you are the rose garden. If your thought is a thorn, then you are kindling for the bath stove. And I love the summary that you share about it here. This constant sort of cleansing. And I think earlier you alluded to kind of resentments and judgments, because one sort of personal experience or observation is this kind of almost like split self. So I love what you're sharing about kind of integrating it. Like sometimes it's lovely to have the experience in community, because you feel lighter and you feel cleansed and you feel washed, and then you're going right back into the practical with very challenging for that part that's of your soul that's come here to be worked. So sometimes they can, it can in the early phases feel a little bit chaotic or a little bit challenging. But again, just this reminder to just, the polishing is the work, the polishing is the purpose, the polishing is the game that we're playing, if you like. Maybe we can just end on this sort of point about love. Love having no object, as Mevlana says, love that simply radiates. And again, this reminder, wash your hands once and for all of the trivialities, cheap imitations, what is false and unreal. And find that philosopher's stone of love. I think you've mentioned the Hope Activity Awe. So I'd really love to come back to this concept today of this bee and this whole kind of, summing it all up, if you like. What is it about the mystic tradition, this mysterian, and this beautiful reminders you've shared here in the book that, it can advance the transformation of the conditioned self more quickly and more thoroughly through moral and religious, more thoroughly than moral and religious teachings alone. You can achieve it through psychotherapy, but it can sometimes be a bit more limited. But it's when you come in and connect and meet that spirituality, to let it be the healer from the inside out. And then again, you're sharing about the bees, and I just love these lines. Revelation for the bees was how to make honey. What then is the revelation for the human being?
Yes. A knowledge was given by God, a knowledge like light that pierced the seven heavens. And there is a light cast from Allah into the heart of the believer. And when that light comes into the heart, we understand in our own experience how dim our understanding was, or we see how lost we were. We see how distorted our sense of reality was. But when that light comes into the heart and we begin seeing more truly, which means We are judging others less, judging and blaming others less, including ourselves. And our pride is reduced, as is our neurotic shame. And we come simply into just being the child of God that we are created to be, without any pretense. We return to our natural state, and we experience the immensity of that divine love. And our response to that is to want to be more worthy of that love and to reflect that love and those qualities in the world. It may be through service, it might be through creative expression, it might be through an act of courage and self-sacrifice. But this is when the light of Allah comes into the heart, and the human being is transformed by that experience, and you're no longer the same false self, not the same imposter you were. You're coming more into yes, being a lover of God.
Oh.
And the lover, this is so characteristic of Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi. There are so many spiritual archetypes in the landscape of existence. There is the high priest, there is the goddess, there is the hermit, there is the shaman, there is the hierophant, there is the magician, there is the ascetic, all of these different things. But Rumi reminds us, Rumi shows to us the archetype of the lover. And he says somewhere that he presents the lover as a kind of helpless person that doesn't really know what to do or how to do it, but the divine comes in and supports that one whose love is sincere. Of course, this is not to deny the need for knowledge, and there is a knowledge of love that is also what Rumi is all about. His 6 volumes of the Mesnavi is an encyclopedia of the knowledge of love, because love needs to be informed by knowledge. He says that no ignorant person ever sat on the throne of love. No ignorant person. But a simple person, yes. A simple heart who then has the knowledge of love, because that simple heart knows what is worthy of our love, knows that not to fall for the imitations of love, not to fall for love of making an idol of the self. So the lover is something quite extraordinary. Rumi says in my translation something like, he compares the intellectual to the lover. He says, intellectuals plan their vacations. Lovers are ashamed to rest. Every time I think of planning a trip or taking a break from my life, I'm struck by that, so that simple-hearted goodness and generosity of the one who's truly a lover. What's better than that?
I'm speechless. Nothing. I was trying to recall, there was a Ibn Arabi quote actually that was in the book, and since I read it in there, it just completely. It's this one, the Andalusian Sufi poet and mystic. He says, my spiritual journey was entirely within my own being, but when I came to the presence of my Lord and Sustainer, I saw that I was nothing but servanthood without a trace of sovereignty.
Yes.
And just, yeah.
And to quote Ibn Arabi again, he said, "Glory be to God, a garden within the flames, a garden within the flames. My heart has become capable of every form. It is a pasture for gazelles. It is a temple for idol worshippers. It is a monastery for monks. It's a church, a monastery for the monks. It is the Kaaba for the pilgrims. Wherever love's caravan goes, my heart follows." So he reached a stage where he could see the divine grace operating in everything. That's not to say all these things are equal and they're all the same. It's not quite the meaning of it, but that the divine grace and guidance is operating in all of these ways. When you realize that, your heart encompasses every form. And you understand that the things we falsely worship and the things that truly deserve our worship, ultimately they're all leading us back, either the hard way or the better way.
Well, thank you so much again. I mean, there's still so much to this book. So again, an encouragement to everyone to get out and read it. It's so beautiful, and may it bring, something to your heart that may not have been touched before. But thank you so much again.
Thank you, dear Sister Tazeen. Thank you especially for the amount of preparation you put into this interview. I really respect how you prepared for it, and it is a delight to be able to have this conversation with you.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Dede. Still plenty to reflect on. I feel quite emotional.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.